And I will now go to the next speaker and introduce again, I did so yesterday, Jeb Brugman, who is still with us. Yesterday he did already the members recognition. Today he will speak to the topic of his book that has just appeared and has the fascinating title, Welcome to the Urban Revolution. Jeb, please.
Thank you, Konrad, and good morning. I'd just like to start by thanking the City of Edmonton. I was on one of the local radio shows this morning and had a chance to do it in that form, but I so appreciate the way the city has been a host, and I don't think it can be said enough, as well as the Secretariat, the International Training Center that works around the clock to make a program like this so powerful. And I threatened something last night that I forgot to do, and I'm going to ask to do it. I'm going to ask people to do it now, which is those who were at the founding ICLEI Congress in 1990, would you please stand up? Those who were there. We have a few. Mark Roseland, Siegfried Brinke was at OECD and actually allowed us to be like a little guerrilla office tucked in a corner against breaking all the rules to organize ICLEI from Europe. So some are here, and thank you. The point I want to make is that those who have been here, Siegfried went on to be the UN mayor of Pristina after the wars. I mean, we've got quite an entrepreneurial bunch here. But I think those who have been here from the beginning also know that one of the great resources, reflecting on David's comment, one of the great resources of ICLEI is its goodwill. As a first mover, that it is that goodwill, the passion that people bring, that shared commitment to a vision that has allowed us, we've leveraged that into the monetary resources and the political resources, and the goodwill of that kind of partnering with others who may not bring as much to the table all the time, but the fact that we share is very important. And I'm going to come back to that at the conclusion. I'm supposed to talk about a scenario, and I'm going to give that a go. Is my slide up? There we go. It gets harder, of course, to say new things about cities and about urban sustainability. So I'm going to start by saying some old things that can't be said enough, I think, and try to apply them to some new problems. After I left ICLEI, had a unique opportunity over 3 or 4 years to work very regularly in India and unexpectedly in villages in India. Having been kind of an urban guy, spending a lot of time in villages, understanding Indian household, their household economy, how they made decisions as consumers. And it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of research on urban migration in a country that is now very much a rural country. It's still 70% rural. By 2050, it will be the largest urban nation in the world with more than 1 billion people, or just around 1 billion people living in cities. And so in India, one can see this transition from the village to the urban reality that we share. We can watch the urban revolution, and I use those years to study the process of urban migration, starting with the individual in a household in a village who makes a decision to move from a rural life that their family has lived in for thousands of years and enter this new realm of being not a rural human being, our tradition as a species, but a homo urbanus. And what I found is the people in the village who made that shift, and were in the process of making that shift, were the most entrepreneurial people in their village. They were the risk takers. And that said something fundamental about what is going on in our global urbanization, that there is a self-selection of people who leave the village and then arrive in the city, and they immediately begin to craft a set of strategies for leveraging the location in a city to advance their family, to advance their caste community, to advance the group that they identify with most. This is not working. And to advance my slides. There we go. So to start with this image, if you travel around the world, you'll see this image just about everywhere, and it's confounding. Why do the mango sellers all hang out together? Isn't that a stupid business strategy to set up right next to your competition? Well, the first thing that the urban migrant understands is the tradition that led to our building cities to begin with, the basic economics of proximity. When people who have common interests cluster together in proximity, they move from being able to do things at tiny little micro scales, and they create proxy economies of scales. And so many cities started, as in this little market, temporary markets where people came together to sell their goods, and they created a market. And in fact, in Chicago, the trading in pork bellies, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, started with a bunch of people who got together to do trading, or in Amsterdam, who started the stock market. So the markets that define our cities started with this process, this basic economics of the city called proximity. And what's interesting about this, and the other ones I'm going to highlight, this is a public good. This is accessible to the poorest person who leaves from a village to go to a city as much as it's accessible to a Silicon Valley high-tech company that wants to co-locate next to their collaborators. And again, what is going on? There we go. Thank you. The second basic economy of the city is density. We see here a slum. This is Dharavi, the now famous slum from Slumdog Millionaire. Dharavi has a density that is, depending on the specific locations, 16 to 25% the density of London, 375 to 600 times the density of Greater Miami. And in our narrative about slums, which I think we need to reconsider, we see this density as something that the poor suffer. But in fact, in my studies of this slum in particular, which is described in my book in detail, and other slums in India and South Africa, this is actually the strategy. It is actually using the economics of density to co-locate activities that allows them to create highly efficient cost structure for living, for working, for starting their businesses. And so here, and the second floor of this building right here, where you've got residences and retail and warehouses and production facilities, here is a business that has a global supply chain in fashion leather garments, and at the end of the supply chain is a brother who owns a retail chain in Miami and in Atlanta, selling these jackets for $10,000. This economics of density allowed the poorest people in India, in the course of 2 generations, to create a global industry. So that's another thing driving this process. And then there's the economies of scale. We understand them well. How do you take the fixed costs of a city, of doing anything, and spread them over a larger group of users? And here what we see is people, and again, this is all public goods, so the economies of scale of the city are as accessible to the poorest people, the most disenfranchised people in the city who build this large slum of almost 1 million people, as much as it's accessible to the people who build the skyscrapers and the business centers and things like that. So we begin to see the city as a process where people come with strategies to leverage the basic public good economics of a city into advancing their cause in an urbanizing world, and those strategies compete with one another and create a quite chaotic process. And then finally, the economics of association. So when you've got a lot of people proximate, densely, at scale, large numbers of people, they've left their old traditional forms and they reorganize themselves in ways that allow them to advance their strategies, very unusual things happen. You can find in the last 40 years of history, the major revolutions of the world arise not from the richest people, but from the poorest people in their cities who leverage the economics of urban residency, the collaborative economies, and they take over the cities of their country. They take over their nation because of this basic advantage of living in a city. Other people do this as well. So we see central business districts, finance, industries, different kinds of industries. They also use density and scale, and they organize as a business community, and they build a central business district. Likewise, coming from the old tradition of the Middle Eastern Mahalla, we have university and research communities. They figure out how to leverage these economies as well. And so we have many, many actors who then figure out how to build some advantage for themselves in the world, be it a slum or a business or a university. And then they say, okay, we've got the cost efficiencies of density, and we've organized ourselves into a user community. Let's invest in infrastructure. So we can take our strategy from our city, and then we can team up with people in other cities, and we can export it around the world. And lo and behold, we have the economics of infrastructure, what I call the economics of extension, that allows these individual cities to build into a global city. And again, that's accessible to anyone. So here is a a militia fighter in Beirut, Lebanon. Hezbollah controls port areas. It has a fiber optic network. It has a banking system. It has gas station system. They've